Hey, what's up guys? Hardleg Joe here, the What deck profile for the Invoked Magician Girls deck. I'm just going to go through everything in here, and then I'll explain how it works. So for monsters, we've got 3 Cosmo Queen, 3 Alister the Invoker, and then 3 of each Magician Girl. That's Kiwi, Chocolate, Apple, Lemon, and Berry. For our spells, we're playing 2 Terraforming, 2 Invocation, 3 Twin Twisters, and 3 Magical Meltdown. For traps, we're playing 3 Quaking Mirror Force, 3 Lost Wind, and 3 Solemn Strike. For our extra deck, we've got a single Castell, a single Invoked Elysium, a single First of the Dragons, and then 2 each of every other Invoked Fusion. As for the side deck, I'll go over that in a little bit. So this deck uses 2 different engines. It's got the Invoked Engine and the Magician Girl engine. I'll go over the Invoked Engine first, because it's arguably the more powerful of the 2. If you're unfamiliar with it, it runs entirely on Alister the Invoker. He's the only main deck monster, and he has 2 effects. The more important one is that when he's normal summoned or flip face up, you can add 1 Invocation from your deck to your hand. Now, Invocation works kind of like Polymerization. You can use just monsters from your hand to make any fusion monster, which is why we got the 1 First of the Dragons in here. But if you use it to make an invoked monster, then you can use monsters from your hand, your field, or either player's graveyard by banishing them. This is important because all the invoked fusion monsters are Alister, plus a different attribute monster. There's 1 for light, 1 for earth, fire, water, wind. You get the idea. So when making these, not only can you get out big powerful monsters using just this 1 card combo, but you can get rid of your opponent's resources in their graveyard, banishing them as material for the fusion. Of course, with this version, you don't need to rely on your opponent having monsters because we're running the Magician Girl engine, which I'll get to in a moment, but more importantly for the invoked part of this, there's a Magician Girl for every single attribute, and Berry Magician Girl will search any of these. So you've got sort of a toolbox here. You could summon out whichever one you need by using whichever Magician Girl you need, and then if your opponent happens to have monsters that you want to use, well, that's just icing on the cake. So just so you know what kind of tools you've got in your toolbox, I'll go over all the different invoked fusions real quick. The light one is during either player's turn when a spell, trap, or monster effect is activated, you can send the same type of card, a monster, spell, or trap, from your hand to the graveyard, negate the activation, and banish that card. So this can negate pretty much everything as long as you've got that kind of card in your hand. That's why we're playing a pretty equal amount of spells and traps, and then a whole bunch of monsters since monster effects are important. Probably what you're going to be making most of the time. The Earth Invoked just has a big 3,000 attack points and 3,300 defense, just a big beat stick. The Fire one is pretty good for OTKs. It gains 200 attack for every card your opponent controls. It can attack all monsters your opponent controls once each, and it does piercing damage, so it can do massive amounts of damage. The Water one is your defensive card. It can't be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. Also, your opponent can't target it, and it can attack while it's in defense position, though it uses its attack for the damage calculation. Raijin's probably the second most useful one. He's the Wind, and this is during either player's turn. You can target a monster on the field and change it to face-down defense position. Finally, the least useful one is Caliga, the Dark one. This is if a player's monster effect attempts to activate, none of that player's monsters can activate their effects for the rest of the turn, and each player can only attack with 1 monster during each battle phase. This can be good in a pinch to get rid of like dark monsters, and because it's level 4, you can use it with your other level 4 cards to make rank 4s. But otherwise, it's not all that great because it limits you just as much as your opponent. It stops you from using more than 1 effect, and it stops you from attacking with more than 1 monster. Now, the one exception to all these is Elysium. This is 1 invoked monster, which means 1 of your fusion monster, because this isn't an invoked, this is an invoker, and 1 monster that was special summoned from the extra deck. So it's a little bit higher tier. You've got to have a fusion monster either already on your field or in the graveyard. Probably 2 if your opponent doesn't have an extra deck monster in the graveyard. But this can be pretty useful. It's treated as having every single attribute, and once per turn, during either player's turn, you can target 1 invoked monster you control or in your graveyard, banish it, and also all monsters your opponent controls with the same attribute. Now, if you're playing against a deck that's primarily 1 attribute, something like Speedroid, Wind Witches, this is a really strong card. You're already going to be able to make the invoked of that type just by using cards from their graveyard, and then you can banish that from your graveyard in order to banish all the cards of that type from their field. If nothing else, you can always banish itself, and because it counts as every single attribute, you can just banish all monsters that your opponent controls. Kind of a lot of resources to dedicate just to wipe your opponent's field, but against certain cases, this can be worth it. And of course, if nothing else, it's got 3,200 attack, 4,000 defense, so it's quite the beat stick. Now that pretty much covers the Invoked engine. The Magician engine is a little bit trickier. A lot of them share the similar effect that if they're attacked, they can special summon a spellcaster from somewhere, but it varies from card to card. Berry Magician Girl is actually probably one of the best just on her own. If this is normal summoned, you can add any Magician Girl from your deck to your hand, so good for searching. And during either player's turn, if your opponent activates a card or effect that targets this, or if they target it with an attack, you can special summon one Magician Girl from your deck and change this card's battle position. So you can just set this out. If they attack it, it's shifted to defense position, and then you summon any of these cards from your deck. Lemon Magician Girl, a little bit less utility, but still kind of useful. It's when it's targeted for an attack, you can special summon one spellcaster type from your hand, its effects are negated, change the attack target to it, and if you do, the attacking monster's attack becomes half. This is where Cosmo Queen becomes really useful. Basically, if they targeted this for an attack, you special summon Cosmo Queen, your opponent has to attack it, and their monster's attack is halved. So unless they have some ridiculously high attack point monster, they're going to be taking a lot of damage, and you've got a 2900 attacker on board. This also has the effect that you can tribute a Magician Girl, except itself, to add a spellcaster from your deck to your hand. Not really all that useful, although in a pinch, because it's any spellcaster, you can use it to get Alister. Apple Magician Girl, meanwhile, if this card is targeted for an attack, special summon a level 5 or lower spellcaster type monster from your hand. Same thing, change the attack target to it, its attack becomes half, but its effects aren't negated. So you can actually do some chains where, like, if you have Apple Magician Girl, you can then summon Lemon, and then use Lemon to summon Cosmo Queen, and then every time you change the attack, you're lowering their attack by half, so you can actually make them do quite a bit of damage. Apple's also pretty good because if it's destroyed either by battle or a card effect, you can target up to 3 Magician Girls in your graveyard with different names and add them to your hand. Chocolate Magician Girl is kind of the same thing. When it's targeted for an attack, you can summon a monster from your graveyard and change the attack target to it, and its attack is halved. It also has this effect that once per turn you can discard a spellcaster to draw a card. Pretty good in general, since your spellcasters being in the graveyard doesn't affect you. You can use Invocation from the graveyard and just go through your deck faster. More importantly, you can use this to discard your Cosmo Queen that you're not going to be able to special summon. And then if they attack Chocolate Magician Girl, you're just summoning Cosmo Queen back out, having them attack into it. Or again, you can just use this with the same old chain. Just go Chocolate, into Apple, into Lemon, into Cosmo Queen. Just crazy. Finally, we have Kiwi. This is the only one that doesn't have an effect that activates when it attacks. It's also level 5, so you're not going to be normal summoning it. But it has 1800 attack, which makes it pretty good for any of their effects. It's also got a neat Honest effect during either player's turn. You can discard it. And Magician Girl monsters you control gain 300 attack and defense for every Magician Girl with a different name on the field or in the graveyard, which can actually give them up to 1500 attack, which is not too bad, especially when you're having their attack. More importantly, if this card is on the field, spellcaster-type monsters you control cannot be destroyed by card effects, and your opponent cannot target them with effects. So if you do manage to resolve one of these, or if you just normal summon it if you've already got some pretty big fusion monsters on the field, this is great because it stops your opponent from destroying Alister or targeting with them effects, or any of your Magician Girls for that matter, or even your Cosmo Queen. So just pretty good defense card if you can get it on the field. Now, everything else in here is just a bit of protection or some sort of search power. We've got the 2 terraformings, which we use to get Magical Meltdown. Magical Meltdown, when it's activated, will let you search out Alister, so you've got a lot of ways to get Alister from your deck to your hand. In addition, this makes it so fusion summons or the activation of your fusion spells can't be negated, which is kind of nice. It doesn't really come up all that often, but if you're in a mirror match, at least they won't be able to negate your fusion summon if you have this out. Although, don't make the mistake, they can still use things like Dimensional Barrier or Torrential Tribute, things that don't negate the summon, but that have the effect of basically just stopping your monster from coming out. The rest, like I said, is just sort of like protection. We're playing the Twin Twister for our spell trap removal, because we want cards in the graveyard. We're playing Quaking Mirror Force. This is particularly good against dinos, I'm finding, because they're weak against effects that activate in the damage step. Lost Wind, because again, we can discard it with Twin Twister, and it's just good effect negation. And of course, Solemn Strike, which normally I try to stay away from, but I'm starting to use it more and more, because it's been like almost 2 years now, and this thing is still not limited. And that pretty much covers the main deck. The side deck's probably what I would actually run. We got another copy of Elysium in here, just in case you run into an archetype that has all the same attribute of monster. We're playing another Invocation. Even though you can recycle this, I don't think I mentioned that before, actually. If this is in the graveyard, you can shuffle it back into the deck, and then get one of your banished Alisters, and return that to your hand. And that's actually pretty key to the Invoked Engine. If you use monsters on the field, and Alister is most certainly going to be on the field, because you normal summon him to get this from your deck to your hand, then he's going to be banished, and when he's banished, you can just add him back to your hand, send this back into the deck, and then next turn, do the same thing again. You're just fusion summoning every single turn. So you could probably even get away with playing just one of these, but DD Crow's being played a lot. A lot of things can banish cards from the graveyard. It's good to have a backup. And against certain decks that really rely on stuff like that, sometimes it's good to have a third. Likewise, against certain decks, Book of Law can be really good. This is tribute one invoked monster and special summon another invoked from your extra deck with a different attribute. So this lets you dodge out of things that would destroy your cards and let you get access to some of these other monsters. This is particularly good against decks where you need one specific one to counter what your opponent's doing, and you just want to make sure that you have the ability to summon it regardless of what your hand is. Likewise, Magical Dimension can be really good against certain decks. If you control a spellcaster type monster, target one monster you control, tribute that target, special summon a spellcaster from your hand, and destroy one monster on the field. Really good for the Magician Girls in general. If you're not going to be able to do as much special summoning, just give you some removal while also letting you flood the field with them. We also got Void Trap Hole. This is what I would side out Twin Twisters for. If your opponent doesn't have a lot of spell traps, if they're playing something like Light Sworns, I'd recommend this just as more like monster negation, more things to stop them. And finally, just Draw Power, Wonder Wand and One Shot Wand, both similar. They both equip to spellcaster type monsters, both give them attack, and both can be destroyed to draw different amounts of cards. A lot of people suggested this in the Discord server when I was making this, but I don't really feel like this deck needs a lot of draw power, or if it does, I'm not really sure what you would remove. All the Magician Girls are kind of important in their own way. I wouldn't really want to put them down to one, and a lot of these spell traps are kind of essential. Like, I wouldn't want to get rid of the Solemn Strikes just to be able to draw my Lost Wind more often. But if you wanted to switch this up, if you're finding these aren't working for you, if you want to lower, maybe get rid of these Cosmo Queens because you're having problems with bricks, this could definitely be something to switch in there. So there you go, there's your deck profile for this week. Invoked Magician Girls, probably not the best thing you can combine Invoked with. It doesn't have a lot of synergy since both archetypes need their normal summon really badly, but it makes this more toolboxy, and you know me, I love toolboxes and stuff like that. And it was nice to see the Magician Girls actually do something. Next week is the 2-year anniversary, which means I'm looking at spirits again. Excited to be trying them out again. Until then, good luck. Have fun.